She's a mistake, and mistakes can be corrected.
Father, stop this now! Or what?
Her or this family? Her or your name? Her or every dollar that comes with it?
Whatever you decide, I'll understand.
You stole it! You stole my watch!
Search her.
You don't have to do this.
Bag. Open it.
I just need to wait.
There's a man at the front entrance for this. He says he's here for Imani. That's Theodore Cowley. What briefly died in God.
I do not know Kylie's what marrying to.
Sometimes the people who judge the loudest are the ones who understand the least. This story reminds us that dignity, kindness, and true worth can never be measured by money, status, skin color, or appearances. The way we treat someone when we believe they have nothing says everything about who we truly are. Now, let's step into this story together. But first, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment on the moments that hit you the hardest.
The pearl brooch pressed into Imani's fingers as she closed her hand around it. She stood at the edge of the ballroom at the Holloway Hotel, where chandelier light fell across the marble floor like honey gone solid. 300 guests drifted through in tailored suits and evening gowns. Champagne flutes held more often than they were actually sipped. This was Pierce Holdings' annual Partner Appreciation Gala, a night for the company to show off its wealth to the investors it now needed more than ever. Imani wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry except the small pearl brooch on her chest. Nothing on her that anyone in that room would recognize. To most people there, she looked like someone who'd wandered in by mistake. But she didn't act like a stranger. By the door, a young server stumbled with a tray of glasses. Crystal teetered in the air. Imani caught it before she'd even thought about it, steadied his hand, and smiled. "You've got it," she said quietly. "Breathe." The young man exhaled like she'd just saved his entire night. She knew the valet's name. She knew the coat check girl's name too, and asked about her mother's surgery. She tipped both of them more than most guests tipped all night. None of them knew who she was. She liked it that way. That was the whole point. Imani had married Julian Pierce 3 years earlier. She had never told his family the truth about where she came from. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not the name behind her. So she drove an ordinary car. She wore plain clothes. She let them all believe she'd come from nothing. Julian found her in the middle of the room and laced his fingers through hers. "You okay?" he asked. He always asked that. He'd grown up in his father's shadow, and he hated how cold this room could feel even with every light in it turned on. "I'm fine," she said. "It's a beautiful night." "My father's in a mood," Julian warned gently. "Stay close to me." She squeezed his hand. "I always do." Around them, every conversation circled back to money. A senator laughed too loud. A banker bragged about his yacht. And under the music, in tight little knots, executives whispered about something else entirely, something worried. Pierce Holdings was in trouble. Imani caught pieces of it as she passed. One more bad quarter, and we're done. Everything's riding on the new sponsorship deal. If the fund chairman doesn't sign, we're finished. They said, the fund chairman, the way other people said a prayer, the partner, whose deal would either save the company or sink it. He was flying in that very night. None of them had ever met him. Imani heard all of it. She didn't say a word. She just sipped her water and watched the room glitter. Near the decorative gas fireplace, Walton Pierce held court. He was tall, silver-haired, and certain of himself in the way only old money allows, though the truth, known to almost no one, was that he hadn't always had any. He shook hands like he was granting favors. When his eyes passed over Imani, they went flat and cold. The way you look at a smudge on clean glass. He had decided who she was the moment Julian brought her home. Poor. Beneath them. A mistake he intended to correct. Imani felt the look land. She'd felt it many times before. She just lifted her chin a little and let it slide off. Margot Pierce, Walton's wife, floated past in emerald silk. She smiled at Imani the way a cat smiles at something small. "Such a brave little brooch," she murmured, and kept walking before Imani could answer. A few nearby guests hid their laughter behind their glasses. Julian's jaw tightened. Imani touched his arm. Don't, she said gently. Not tonight. Tonight matters. She glanced toward the tall windows of the ballroom. Outside, the long drive curved into the dark, empty and waiting. She checked her phone once, read a message, and slipped it back into her clutch. Whatever it said, it made her shoulders settle. She knew something the whole room didn't. Walton had already started toward her, glass in hand, that cold look hardening into something meaner. He had an audience now. He liked an audience. And Imani, calm, quiet, underestimated, had no idea that the man she was waiting for was only minutes from the hotel's front gate. The storm was about to walk through the front door. They just didn't know it yet. Walton reached her in the center of the room, where the most people could see. You, he said, loud enough to turn heads. I want a word. The string quartet kept playing, but quieter now. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Imani set down her water and folded her hands. Of course, Mr. Pierce. Don't call me Mr. Pierce like we're friends. He swirled his glass. You've been in my family 3 years. 3 years. And in all that time, I've never once seen proof of where you come from. I've never hidden anything, sir. No. He smiled without warmth. Then where's your family? Where's your money? Where are the people who should be standing beside you tonight? Imani held his gaze. They couldn't come. How convenient. A few guests drifted closer, pulled the way people are pulled toward a car wreck. Walton felt them gathering. His voice rose to fill the room. Let me tell you what I see, he said. I see a girl with no name and no fortune who married into one of the oldest families in this state. I see someone who looked at my son and saw a bank account. That isn't true, Julian cut in, stepping beside her. Dad, stop. Stay out of this, Julian. She's my wife. She's a mistake, Walton snapped. And mistakes can be corrected. The word landed hard. Imani didn't flinch, but Julian's hand found hers and held tight. Walton turned back to her, slow and deliberate. He was enjoying this now. I had you looked into, he said. Imani's eyes lifted. You did what? You heard me. I hired a man. Quiet, discreet. I wanted to know exactly what crawled into my family. He spread his hands. And you know what he found? Nothing. No estate. No family name. No history worth a damn. Just a girl from nowhere aiming high. The crowd shifted. Someone whispered. A woman near the fireplace covered a small laugh with her glass. Imani stayed very still. Your investigator wasn't very good. My investigator, Walton said, is the best money can buy. And money, dear, is the one thing your kind never understands. You only know how to take it. There it was again. Your kind. He said it the way other men said a slur, smooth and certain, daring anyone to object. Julian's voice shook. Don't talk to her like that. I'll talk to her however I like. This is my house, my name, my money. Walton leaned toward Imani. And you will never have any of it. A server passed with a tray. Walton snapped his fingers without looking. You. Stop. The young man froze. Take a good look at this woman's face. If she so much as touches anything in this building that isn't hers, I want to know. The server's eyes, the same young man Imani had just saved from dropping his tray, flicked to her, full of apology, then dropped to the floor. He hurried away. Walton wasn't finished. He looked toward a man in a charcoal suit near the bar, his right hand, Bartholomew Shaw, the company's chief financial officer. Bart, he said, first thing tomorrow, I want my son's name off every account. The cards, the car, the apartment, all of it. Today he has a future. Tomorrow he has nothing. Shaw shifted his weight, glanced at Julian, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. This wasn't a tantrum anymore. It was one signature away from real, and everyone in earshot knew it. Imani felt the heat climbing her neck. Not anger, something older and heavier. The exhaustion of being watched, doubted, treated like a thief in a room she'd done nothing wrong in. She breathed through it. May I sit down, sir? You may leave, Walton said. That's the only thing I'm offering you. Margot appeared at his shoulder, drawn by the noise. She looked Imani up and down with open distaste. Walton, darling, she purred, don't waste your breath. She tilted her head. Tell me, sweetheart, what was the plan? Marry the son, wait for the inheritance, then disappear with half? There was no plan, Imani said quietly. Of course there wasn't. Margot's smile was ice. There never is. The circle of guests had grown. 40, maybe 50 people now, half watching, half pretending not to. Phones had started to appear, held low against expensive dresses, red recording lights blinking like little eyes. Walton saw them and didn't care. He wanted witnesses. 3 years, he said again, shaking his head. 3 years my son lied to me, brought this into my home, sat her at my table. He pointed at Imani, with the hand holding his glass, wine sloshing near the rim. Do you know what people say about us now? The Pierces who let a nobody wear the family name. I never asked to wear it, Imani said. But you took it. Your kind always takes. Julian stepped fully between them, shielding her with his body. That's enough. We're leaving. You're not going anywhere. Walton's voice dropped low and dangerous. Not until she hears the truth in front of everyone here. The room went quiet enough to hear the candles hiss. Here is the truth, Walton said. You were nothing before my son, and you'll be nothing after him. I built this family from the ground up. I will not watch it handed to a woman who reeks of a life I clawed my way out of. And there it was, the thing underneath all of it. Walton Pierce had not been born rich. He had spent 40 years terrified of slipping back. Every person he looked down on was a mirror he refused to face. He didn't hate Imani because she was beneath him. He hated her because some buried part of him remembered being there too. Not that he'd ever admit it. To Walton, this was simple. He was protecting his legacy. He was the reasonable one, the hero of his own story, defending 3 generations from a stranger at the gate. Sir, Imani said, and her voice was so calm it cut through the noise. I didn't marry Julian for your money. I have never touched your money, and I never will. Easy words. Walton laughed, a short, ugly sound. And you're a fool on top of everything else. He turned to the crowd, performing now. You see no fight in her, no pride, because she knows what she is. She knows she doesn't belong under this roof, breathing this air, standing on my floors. He looked back at her, lip curling. You're not fit to clean them. Somewhere behind him, Margot laughed. A few others joined in, thin and nervous. The sound scraped across the room. Imani closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. When she opened them, they were dry and steady. Julian was shaking with rage. Apologize to her. Right now? Apologize. Walton looked genuinely amazed. She's done nothing but use you, and you're too blind to see it. His jaw tightened. But I'll fix that too, right here, tonight, in front of everyone. He raised his glass like a man about to give a toast. The room leaned in. Julian, he said, you have a choice to make right now. Her or this family. Her or your name. Her or every dollar that comes with it. Julian didn't move. Choose carefully, son, because the second you pick that woman, you are no longer a Pierce. No inheritance, no company, no home. You'll have nothing but her, and we both know that's nothing at all. The whole room held its breath. Imani turned to Julian. Her eyes were soft and a little scared, but not for herself. Whatever you decide, she whispered, I'll understand. I mean it. Julian looked at his father, then at the silver-haired guests waiting to watch him crumble, then at Imani, the woman who knew every server's name and had never once asked him for a thing. I don't need a second to think, Julian said. Walton's smile widened, certain of his win. I choose her, Julian said. I'll always choose her. The smile froze on Walton's face. A gasp moved through the crowd. Margot's glass stopped halfway to her lips. For one heartbeat, Walton simply stared, as if he hadn't understood the words. Then his face went dark red, the color climbing from his collar to his hairline. Then get out, he said, voice trembling with fury. Both of you. Out of this hotel, out of my family. You're dead to me, Julian. You hear me? Dead. Imani took her husband's hand. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply lowered her eyes the way she always did when the cruelty got loud and turned toward the door. But she didn't head for the exit. She walked toward the tall windows of the ballroom instead, toward the long, dark driveway where a pair of headlights had just swept through the gate. Imani stopped at the window. Outside, headlights swept up the drive and slowed. Walton saw her looking and mistook it for defiance. "Did you not hear me?" he barked. "I said get out. Use the door like a normal person, not my windows." "I'm waiting for someone," Imani said softly. "You're waiting for nothing. You have nothing." He stepped closer, wine trembling in his glass. "Walk out now before I have you removed." That was when Margot screamed. It was a small, theatrical sound, one hand flying to her bare wrist. "My watch," she gasped. "My grandfather's pocket watch. It was right here." The room turned. Margot's eyes locked onto Imani like a trap snapping shut. She was standing next to me. She touched my arm not 10 minutes ago. I felt it. Margot's voice climbed. "She took it. This little thief took it." "I never touched you," Imani said. Her calm only made it worse. "Liar." Margot turned to the crowd, performing now. "I knew it. The second she walked in. I knew you let people like her into your home, and this is what happens." Walton's face lit with something ugly and satisfied. He finally had what he wanted. Not just a poor girl to mock, a criminal to catch. "Reyes," he called. A broad man in a dark suit stepped out of the shadows near the wall. Desmond Reyes ran event security for the hotel. He had an earpiece and the flat, careful eyes of a man who followed orders. "Sir, this woman has stolen from my wife. Search her." Reyes hesitated just for a second. "Sir, I'd need her consent. I don't care what you need. This is my event. Search her bag now." The whole room had gone silent. Somewhere a glass clinked against a tray. The candlelight threw long shadows across the marble, and every one of them seemed to point at Imani. She looked at Desmond Reyes. He looked back, uncomfortable, but his hand was already reaching. "You don't have to do this," Imani told him quietly. "He doesn't have a choice," Walton snapped. "Bag. Open it." Imani's jaw tightened. For the first time all night, something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear, a deep, tired anger. She had been here before. Not this room, but this moment. Hands reaching for her things, strangers deciding she was guilty before a single question. She held out her small clutch. Reyes reached for it gently, almost apologetically, but Imani still felt every eye in the room crawl over her skin. A grown woman searched like a suspect at a black-tie corporate event. The shame of it was never hers to carry. Somehow it always landed on her shoulders anyway. He opened it slowly in front of everyone and turned it over. A phone, a folded tissue, a tube of lip balm, a single house key. He shook it once, twice. Nothing fell out but a stick of gum. No watch. The silence changed shape. A few guests glanced at each other. "Check again," Margot demanded. Reyes checked again. He ran a thumb along the lining. He held the empty clutch upside down and shook it hard. Still nothing. "There's nothing here, ma'am," he said carefully. Then she hit it on her. "Check her coat. Check her." "That's enough," Julian exploded. He lunged forward, and a second guard caught him by the shoulders. "Get your hands off her things. She didn't take anything." "Hold him," Walton said coldly. "Dad, hold him." The guard's hands clamped down. Julian strained against them, jaw clenched, but he couldn't break free. Imani caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet," it said. "Wait for it." Imani stood very still in the middle of it all. 300 people watched, phones recording. A guard gripped her husband. Another held her open purse. And the host of the party stared at her, with open contempt, daring her to cry. She didn't. "Sir," she said, and her voice carried clean across the room. "Your wife's watch is on the small table by the fireplace." She set it down when she fixed her earring. "I watched her do it an hour ago." Every head turned toward the fireplace. There, glinting in the candlelight on a small marble table, sat an antique pocket watch, its gold chain coiled beside it. Margot's mouth opened, then closed. A server walked over, lifted the watch, and held it up for the room to see. It caught the light and scattered it across the ceiling. A ripple of unease moved through the guests. A few looked away, ashamed to have watched it happen. An older woman near the bar set down her glass and quietly reached for her coat. Whatever this party had been, it had curdled into something none of them wanted to be filmed standing near. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Imani had been accused, searched, and paraded in front of 300 people. And she had been right. She had been right the whole time. But Walton Pierce did not apologize. Men like him never do, not when they're losing. That proves nothing, he said, though his voice had lost some of its edge. She could have planned to take it later. People like her always have an angle. People like her, Julian said, low and shaking, still held by the guard. Say it plainer, Dad. Say what you actually mean. I mean exactly what I say. Walton turned on his son. She is beneath us. She always will be. And you have thrown your entire life away for a woman who doesn't even own a decent pair of shoes. He stepped close to Imani, close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath, and lowered his voice to something almost gentle. Somehow that was worse. I am going to make sure you leave here, with nothing, he murmured. No husband, no name, no money. I'll bury you in lawyers, until you forget you ever met this family. Do you understand me? You picked the wrong house to climb into. Imani looked up at him. She was not crying. She was not shaking. When she spoke, her voice was steady and almost kind. No, Mr. Pierce, she said. You picked the wrong woman to humiliate. Something in her tone made him pause, just for a heartbeat. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. There and gone, like a draft moving a candle flame. Then he laughed it off. Is that a threat from you? He shook his head. You don't have the power to threaten anyone in this room. I don't need power, Imani said. I just need to wait. Outside, a car door shut, firm and unhurried. The sound carried, through the tall windows, into the silent ballroom. Footsteps followed, slow and even, crossing the entrance toward the front steps. Walton didn't notice. He was still glaring at Imani, still drunk on his own cruelty. But Desmond Reyes did. His earpiece crackled to life, and whatever he heard made his eyebrows lift. He touched the earpiece. Say that again, he murmured. He listened. His face changed. Sir, Reyes said quietly. Walton ignored him. Sir. Louder now. What? Walton spun around. What could possibly be so important? There's a car at the front entrance. Reyes swallowed. A man's coming in. He says he's here for Imani. Walton snorted. Then throw him out with her. Whoever he is, I don't. Sir. Reyes's voice had gone strange. Tight. I think you're going to want to see this man yourself. The tall front doors of the ballroom swung open. Cold night air rolled in, guttering the nearest candles. The string quartet stopped playing. 300 guests turned toward the entrance as one. A man stepped through the doorway. He was older, calm, dressed in a plain dark coat, with no tie and no jewelry. Nothing to mark him as anyone at all. He moved without hurry, the way a man moves, when he has never once been told to wait. His eyes swept the room slowly, taking in the guards, the open purse, the watch in the server's hand, his daughter standing in the center of it all, and his face, so calm until, that moment, went very, very cold. He didn't look angry exactly. He looked like a man reading the last page of a book he had already finished. He paused beside Imani, rested one hand lightly on her shoulder, and she let out a breath she had been holding for 2 long hours. Up close, there was a stillness to him that made the loud, glittering room suddenly feel very small. Walton looked at the stranger and saw exactly what he expected to see. A nobody, a plain man in a plain coat, another person beneath him. He had no idea he was looking at the one man who could erase everything he owned. And who? Walton sneered. Is this supposed to be? The man said nothing yet. He just walked forward, slow and steady, into the brightest part of the room. The man kept walking, and Margot, of all people, made the first mistake. She saw a plain coat. She saw dark skin. She saw a man, without a tie at her party. And her brain filled in the rest, before her eyes could correct it. Excuse me. She stepped into his path, lifting her wine like a barrier. The staff entrance is around the back. You don't just walk through the front like you own the... She flicked her wrist. A long splash of red wine arced through the air and soaked down the front of his coat. The room gasped. The man stopped. He looked down at the stain spreading across his chest. Then he looked up at Margot, and he smiled. It was not an angry smile. It was worse than that. It was the calm, patient smile of a man who had just been handed the last piece of evidence he needed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That's very helpful." Margot blinked, thrown. "I what?" He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, dabbed the stain once, and tucked it away, as if nothing at all had happened. The whole time, his eyes stayed on the room, watching, counting, remembering faces. That was when Bartholomew Shaw went white. The CFO had been hovering near the bar, phone in hand, half watching the chaos. Now he stared at the man in the wine-stained coat, and the color drained out of his face like water from a cracked glass. "Oh my God," Shaw whispered. "Bart," Walton snapped. "What is it?" Shaw didn't answer. He took a step forward, then stopped, then took off his glasses and put them back on, as if he didn't trust his own eyes. "Mr. Calloway," he said, and his voice cracked on the name. The room went still. "Sir, I had no idea you were coming tonight. Nobody told us." "Nobody was meant to know," the man said. "I wanted to see this family the way they are, when they think no one important is watching." Walton's smile flickered. "Calloway? Who the hell is Calloway?" "Bart, what are you?" Shaw turned to his boss, and he looked like a man watching a building come down. "Walton," he said, "that's Theodore Calloway, chairman and founder of Calloway Ventures." He swallowed hard. "The sponsorship deal, $1.2 billion. The one keeping us alive. He owns it. He owns us." The words landed in the ballroom like a dropped tray. A murmur swept through the guests, fast and electric. Phones turned. The senator, who'd laughed too loud an hour ago, suddenly looked very interested in his shoes. Walton's face had gone slack. That's impossible. He came in a plain coat. He has no entourage. He doesn't need one," Shaw said. Theodore Calloway finally turned his full attention on Walton, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You're right," Theodore said. "I came quietly. I came in an old coat. I didn't announce myself, and I didn't bring a single guard." His voice stayed even, almost gentle. "I wanted to know what kind of man my daughter married into." The word landed in the silence like a stone in a still pond. "Daughter." Every head turned to Amani. She stood beside Theodore now, calm and steady, his hand still resting on her shoulder. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. Walton's mouth opened. No sound came out. "You spent your whole evening telling my daughter she was nothing," Theodore went on. "You called her trash. You said she crawled in because she smelled money. You had your man search her like a criminal in front of 300 people." He tilted his head. "Did I miss anything?" Walton's lips moved. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." "There hasn't," Theodore said. "I heard it all from the driveway. The windows were open." The blood was draining from Walton's face now, sliding from his cheeks down to his collar. His hand groped behind him for the back of a chair and gripped it, white-knuckled. He understood, finally, what he had done. He had screamed at, searched, and disowned the daughter of the one man on earth who held his entire empire in his hands. The contract, the company, the 3 generations of name he had been so desperate to protect. All of it ran straight through the quiet man in the wine-stained coat. "You can't." Walton's voice came out thin and ready to break. "You can't pull the contract. It would destroy us. Thousands of jobs, the whole company. You can't." "I can," Theodore said simply. "And you've spent the last hour showing me exactly why I should." Walton swayed. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the chair, then lost it, and sank down onto the cold marble floor he had been so proud of. The floor he had told Imani she wasn't fit to clean. He sat there in his $1,000 suit, pale and shaking, while 300 guests stared, and 100 phones recorded every second of it. "Get up, Walton," Margot hissed, frozen with the empty wine glass still in her hand. "Get up." But Walton couldn't get up. The most powerful man in the room had just walked through his front door in a plain coat. And the empire that took 40 years to build was about to come down in a single night. For a moment, no one moved. Then the scrambling began. Margot recovered first. She set down her glass and rushed toward Theodore with a bright, desperate smile. the same smile she gave donors and photographers. "Mr. Calloway, this is all just a silly mix-up," she gushed. "The lighting in here is terrible. I never would have. I mean, your coat. I'll have it cleaned, of course. And Imani. Well, Imani has always been like a daughter to us." "Stop," Theodore said. Not loud, just final. Margot stopped. Walton struggled to his feet, gripping the chair, his voice coming out shaky and small. "Listen, Theodore. May I call you Theodore? We're reasonable men. Whatever was said tonight, it got out of hand. We can fix this privately." "A few heated words," Theodore repeated. "Yes, exactly." Theodore looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The wine stain on his coat had gone dark, like old blood. "My daughter married your son 3 years ago," Theodore said. 3 years. In that time, she never once told you who I was. Do you know why? Walton said nothing. Because she wanted to be loved for herself, not my money, not my name. So she wore plain dresses and drove a plain car and let you all believe whatever you wanted. She gave you 3 years to show her 1 ounce of kindness. Theodore's voice never rose. And tonight, when you thought she was poor and powerless, you showed her exactly who you are. He turned slowly, taking in the whole silent room. "And now," he said, "everyone knows." He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply dialed a number and lifted it to his ear. And somehow that calm was more terrifying than any rage could have been. "It's me," Theodore said into the phone. "The Pierce sponsorship, 1.2 billion. Freeze it tonight. Effective immediately. Begin termination first thing in the morning." A pause. "Yes, I'm sure. I'll explain when I'm back." He hung up. Walton made a sound like the air had been punched out of him. You can't just. That's thousands of jobs. That's the whole. You should have thought about those thousands of jobs," Theodore said, "before you searched my daughter like a thief." The room had become a wall of glowing screens. Every phone was up now, openly recording, the guards no longer pretending to stop anyone. The night had already escaped the walls of the hotel. It was somewhere else now, multiplying, unstoppable. Bartholomew Shaw quietly stepped away from Walton, putting space between himself and the man who had just sunk the company. He was already thinking about the board, about the morning, about saving whatever could still be saved. Desmond Reyes had let go of Julian and stepped back, hands open at his sides, the look of a man realizing he'd followed the wrong order in front of 300 witnesses. Julian crossed the room and pulled Imani into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "For all of it. For him. It was never you," she said. "You chose me. That's all I ever needed." Theodore watched them, and for the first time, that night, his hard face softened. He put a hand on Julian's shoulder. "You stood between her and your own father," Theodore said, "when you thought you'd lose everything for it. I won't forget that, son." Walton watched the 3 of them. This little circle of warmth he would never be part of. And something in him broke. Not with rage, with understanding. He had been handed a daughter-in-law worth more than his entire fortune, and he had spent the night spitting on her. "Please," he said hoarsely. "Theodore, there has to be something I can." But Theodore had already turned away. "We're leaving," he told Imani gently. "All of us, together." And as they walked toward the tall doors, the cold night air rushing in to meet them, Walton Pierce stood alone in the middle of his glittering ballroom, surrounded by 300 guests, and more alone than he had ever been in his life. The fall had only just begun. By morning, the whole country had seen it. The videos went up before the gala even ended. 300 guests, 200 phones, and not one of them on Walton's side. By morning, the clips had been stitched together, captioned, and shared millions of times. The headline wrote itself: "Corporate Chairman Humiliates Black Guest, Who Turns Out to Be His Biggest Partner's Daughter." People watched Walton scream the word trash. They watched a grown woman searched like a thief over a watch sitting in plain sight. They watched a man in a plain coat say 5 quiet words, "I heard it all," and bring down an empire. The internet did what the internet does. It found Walton's old interviews, where he called himself a self-made man of values. It set them beside the footage of wine splashing down a stranger's coat. and the contrast was merciless. Pierce Holdings opened on the stock market that morning and dropped like a stone. By noon, shares were down nearly 40%. By the closing bell, the company had lost billions in value. Partners who'd shaken Walton's hand for years suddenly couldn't be reached. 2 more clients pulled their accounts before lunch. Inside the glass tower, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. They gathered around a long table while the city moved on below them. At the head sat Patricia Wendell, chair of the board, sharp, silver-haired, and done. She had warned Walton for years that his temper would cost them. Now it had cost them everything. "There's no version of this we survive with him at the top," she said. "The footage is everywhere. The contract is gone. Every hour he stays CEO, we bleed." Walton sat at the far end, gray and hollow, still in yesterday's clothes. "Patricia, 40 years I built this. You can't just—" "We can," she said, echoing words he'd heard once before. "And the votes are already counted. It wasn't close." The board removed Walton Pierce as chief executive and stripped him of his seat that same afternoon. The man who had spent his life terrified of losing his place had lost all of it in a single day. Not to a stranger, not to bad luck, but to his own voice, captured on 200 phones. Bartholomew Shaw was named interim CEO. His first call was to Theodore Calloway. He did not get the contract back, but he got a meeting, which was more than Walton would ever get again. The legal fallout came next, and it came hard. Imani had not screamed. She had not thrown anything. But what had been done to her had names in a courtroom. A lawyer laid them out plainly: unlawful detention, false imprisonment, the forced search of her belongings, without consent or cause. Desmond Reyes had held back her husband. A second guard had held her. All of it on film. Imani filed a civil suit. She didn't ask for vengeance. She asked for the record to say, in writing, what had happened. The Pierce family settled within weeks. The amount was sealed, but the apology was not. It was entered into the public court record, signed, undeniable. For a family whose whole religion was image, the paper trail was its own kind of sentence. Desmond Reyes faced charges of his own for the unlawful detention. Facing real consequences, he did the math fast. He testified that he had warned Walton, that he had said he needed consent, and that Walton had told him he didn't care. The recording backed every word. Reyes kept his freedom by telling the truth he should have told that night. Margot didn't escape either. Throwing a full glass of wine in a man's face has a name too, and Theodore's lawyers used it. Rather than fight a case the whole world had already watched, Margot settled with a formal written apology, read aloud and filed for the record. The woman who had sneered about a brave little brooch had to put her name under the words, "I was wrong." The country watched all of it land, and it did not look away. News anchors played the footage on a loop. Panels argued about it for days. Strangers began recognizing Imani in the grocery store and simply nodded at her. The small, quiet nod people give someone who has been through something and come out the other side. Still standing, Walton's clubs quietly revoked his memberships. The board seats he held at 3 charities asked for his resignation. The invitations stopped coming. The name Pierce, 3 generations old, became something else overnight. A punchline, a warning, a clip people sent each other with the caption, "Watch what happens at the end." He had wanted to protect his legacy. In one night, he had become it. Just not the way he'd planned. And through all of it, Imani stayed quiet. She gave no interviews. She posted nothing. When reporters camped outside, she made them coffee and gently asked them to please give the family room. Her silence said more than any statement could. She had never wanted a spectacle. She had only wanted, for 3 years, to be treated like a person. The world had simply caught up to what she'd known all along. Theodore made one public comment, and only one. A reporter shouted a question as he left a building downtown, asking whether the contract would ever come back. Theodore stopped. He looked into the cameras, calm as ever, the way he'd looked at a room full of people who had decided he was nobody. "I don't do business," he said, "with men who measure people by the price of their shoes. That's not punishment. That's just good sense." Then he got in his car and drove away. And the clip of those 2 sentences went around the world by dinner time. Pierce Holdings did not die. Companies rarely do, but it shrank. It restructured. It survived only after new leadership signed reforms it should have had all along: a real ethics office, real consequences, a written promise that no employee or guest would ever again be searched or detained on one man's word. The cost of those reforms had a face, and his name was Walton. Somewhere, in a smaller house now, with the news muted and the phone unplugged, Walton Pierce sat alone and watched a video of himself he could not stop watching. The marble floor, the wine, the quiet man in the plain coat. He had been right about one thing, in the end. Someone in that ballroom hadn't belonged. It just wasn't Imani. It was him. 6 months later, almost nothing about Imani had changed. She still drove the same ordinary car. She still wore plain dresses. She still knew the name of every server at every restaurant and tipped them like they'd saved her life. The money had always been there, behind her whole life. She had simply never needed it to know who she was. Julian, though, had changed. He stood taller now. The fear he'd carried about his father his whole life was gone, burned away the moment he chose Imani in front of 300 people and didn't lose her. He went to work for Theodore's company, not as a favor. He earned it. He started near the bottom and learned the business the way his wife had always wanted to be treated, on merit, not on a name. Theodore watched his daughter and her husband build a quiet, good life. And he was at peace. He never gloated about that night. He didn't need to. He had walked into a room full of people who decided he was nothing, and he had let them be exactly who they were. That was the whole lesson. He never once had to raise his voice to teach it. Pierce Holdings survived under new leadership, smaller and humbled, with rules written in the blood of one man's pride. Bartholomew Shaw ran it carefully. The first thing he did was tear out the old security policy that let a guest be searched on one man's word. He framed a copy of the new one and hung it by the door where everyone could see it. As for Walton, Walton lived quietly now in a smaller house with a name that opened no doors. Sometimes, late at night, he'd start to type an apology to Imani. He never sent it. Some part of him understood that the only apology that mattered was the one he'd refused to give when it could have changed everything. When she stood in his ballroom, calm and kind, asking only to be left alone. He had been handed a daughter-in-law worth more than his entire fortune, and he had thrown her away because of the color of her skin and the price of her shoes. That was the part that would haunt him, not the money. The kindness he had been offered and spat on, again and again, while it stood right in front of him. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. The story you just heard is made up. Imani, Walton, the gala, none of it is real. But the feeling at the center of it absolutely is. The humiliation of walking into a room and being judged before you say a single word. The assumption that you took something, that you don't belong, that you're less. That part isn't fiction. It happens every single day to real people in real rooms. And most of the time, there's no billionaire father waiting outside in a black car. There's no contract to cancel, no perfect twist, no 200 phones catching it all. Most of the time, the person being treated like Imani just has to swallow it and go home. So the real test was never Walton's. It was everyone else's. The 40 guests who watched and laughed. The ones who looked away. The ones who recorded but never stepped in. Because that's the part of the story we actually get to choose in our own lives, in our own rooms. Now I want to hear from you. If you'd been standing in that ballroom before anyone knew who Imani was, would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed quiet and watched? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. I read them. And if this story moved you, do me a favor. Like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories where the quiet ones turn out to hold all the cards. Because the lesson Imani lived is one worth remembering. Never measure a person by what they're wearing. The richest soul in the room is almost never the loudest one. Sometimes it's the quiet woman in the plain dress who knows everyone's name and never once needed you to know hers.